morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's better, thank you. It's great to see all of you. Thanks so much for coming on. Such a blizzard this morning. This is about as close as we've had to it this winter, but it's great to see so many of you come out. And also a really big thank you to Indeed, our partners and supporters today. You'll hear more from Indeed in just a little bit, but it's great to be partnering with them on this event. I'm Jonathan Bowles. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. If you don't know about us, the Center is an independent think tank focused on creating a more equitable economy in New York and expanding economic opportunity for all New Yorkers. Much of our work in recent years has focused on shining a light on increasing access to good jobs in this city. We've written about the need to scale up the city's most effective tech training programs, shown why there is so much potential to expand apprenticeships in high-wage industries like finance, tech, and healthcare, called for extending the state's tuition assistance program to cover part-time CUNY and SUNY students, and made the case for new programs to help the roughly 700,000 adults in the city who have some college credits but no degree to reconnect with CUNY and complete their credential. But there is another largely untapped opportunity that could increase access to well-paying jobs for countless low-income New Yorkers: expanding skills-based hiring. Today, tens of thousands of New Yorkers are shut out of good jobs simply because they don't meet a widespread but often unnecessary requirement for the positions they seek: holding a college degree. Although considering credentials such as a college degree is still useful for some jobs in today's economy, many occupations in fields from tech and finance to legal services and government could be ably filled by workers who bring considerable skills to the role but are too often screened out because the hiring process doesn't adequately assess true skills. Some employers in both the private and public sectors have already embraced skills-based hiring. As just one example, a year ago, last March, the state of Maryland officially eliminated the 4-year college degree requirement from thousands of state jobs there, instantly making those positions accessible to residents who don't have a college degree but have other experience or training. New York still has a long way to go, and there's a lot to learn from employers and public sector governments like the state of Maryland. I'm excited that today's forum will delve into these issues and explore exactly what's needed to make progress on skills-based hiring in New York. I want to thank all of our amazing speakers for being here today and joining us. A special thanks again to Indeed for their partnership and support and for their leadership on this important issue. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Abby Carlton, Indeed's Global Head of Social Impact. Abby leads Indeed's efforts to break down bias and barriers in hiring through product innovation, partnerships, and community initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Abby.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome everybody. I am so glad to see all of you here, and thank you so much for folks who are joining us virtually. I'm really glad that the weather has held up, at least for now, fingers crossed. I just want to start by thanking Jonathan and the team at the Center for an Urban Future. I have been a follower and admirer for a long time now, and it is such an exciting opportunity for us at Indeed to partner with CUF as we think about how we can bring skills-based hiring to New York more fully. So today, I think we have this great opportunity together to first reflect and look back at all of the progress that has been made around skills-based hiring across the country. We have some great leaders who are here with us today who are going to speak about their own experiences, both here in New York and more broadly, in advancing skills-based hiring and more equitable hiring. And then I think even more importantly, we have the chance to say, what would it mean to invest more in skills-based hiring right here in New York City, and what outcomes could that lead to for job seekers across New York? So for us at Indeed, our mission is to help people get jobs, and in our social impact work, we say that our mission is to help all people get jobs. Because we know that while talent is universal, opportunity is not. And we think that skills-based hiring is actually a really big piece of this puzzle. Too many job seekers who have the skills are screened out of good jobs because they don't have a degree. And too many job seekers who have the skills are screened out of good jobs because they don't have a way to demonstrate those skills. So for us, as we think about our role as a platform that brings together millions of employers and hundreds of millions of job seekers globally, we want to move our platform in the direction of helping those job seekers and employers match based on skills. And I think for all of us in this room, whether we're coming from government or philanthropy, from the private sector, from the nonprofit world, we have an opportunity to work together in new ways to push skills-based hiring forward. And I think this today is just going to be a great opportunity to lift up some of those new ways of working together, some of those ways of working together that have really advanced this work in other places. And I'm just excited to jump in. So I will stop there, and I get to introduce our moderator for our first panel, Eli Dvorkin. And Eli, let me make sure that I get your title right, is the Editorial and Policy Director for the Center for an Urban Future.
Thanks so much, Abby. Good morning, everyone. I think that first good morning worked out okay. We can try it maybe one more time. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's my great pleasure to moderate today's discussion and to introduce our wonderful panelists. So let me just get right into it. You've all just met Abby, but Abby is the Global Head of Social Impact for Indeed. She leads the company's efforts. She has focused on this work for now many years, having previously spent almost a decade at the Rockefeller Foundation, where she also led their efforts on jobs and economic opportunity. So welcome, Abby. Thank you so much to Indeed for your support and for being here with us today. It's great to have you with us. We're also joined today by Beth Berwick. Beth is a partner at Grads of Life, a Year Up subsidiary that works with companies to build inclusive talent practices. Beth spent the past 20 years working with Fortune 500 companies across sectors to create innovative talent solutions with expertise in implementing skills-first approaches. Beth, great to have you with us. We're also joined today by Yudelkas Nunez Rodriguez. Yudelkas is Vice President for People and Capabilities at MasterCard, where she leads the company's talent initiatives. Her career spans over 15 years of human resources experience with expertise in talent management, leadership development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yudelkas, thanks for being here today. And we're also joined today by Jose Ortiz Jr. Jose is Senior Advisor for Workforce Development in the Office of New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Previously, he was CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, a membership organization focused exclusively on the workforce development sector. Hey, Joey, great to have you here. And we will hopefully very soon also be joined by a couple of other panelists. When those folks get to the room, if our team could just have them come right up onto the stage and join us, that would be fantastic. So Abby, you got things started a little bit with some of the context here, but I wanted to start with you for this part of the discussion and ask you a little bit about the big picture here. You know, we know that there was a major structural shift toward skills away from degree requirements in the tight labor market kind of leading up to the pandemic in sort of 17, 18, 2019. And it seems like there's something similar has happened during the pandemic as well, maybe not structural so much as transient, but with so many companies struggling to hire in 2020, 2021, 2022. So could you help us understand what's the big picture here? Is there really a major shift away from degrees happening across our economy in the US today? What's driving that? Is it here to stay? And what could the impact be for workers and companies here in New York City?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a big question. So I'll grab a piece of it, and we'll sort of see where we go. But I think that sitting at Indeed, it has been really interesting to see how the conversations with our clients have shifted during the pandemic. I think you're right. I've had the privilege of working in the skills-based hiring space for a while now, and I think you're right that before the pandemic, this shift was already underway, and that is thanks to many of the folks who are in this room. But for us, during the pandemic, especially when the labor market got really tight, we started to hear from clients in a different way about the need to tap into new talent pools, the need to hire more equitably, and really wanting guidance and tools to be able to do so. And so I think that is really wind at all of our backs for this conversation as we think about how to operationalize this market need that we're hearing from employers. I think the fact is, and this is not news to any of us in this room, but a lot of traditional hiring practices are not particularly good for workers or employers. And I think everybody sort of recognizes that, but then there's the so what? So then how do we do it better? And that's where we can get stuck, because it feels really hard to think about, okay, sure, we could do better, but where do I start? And how do I upend the way that I currently hire? And I have all my systems set up in this way. And yeah, it's not great, but it's been working well enough. So I think that's where conversations like the one today really are helpful, because we can start to lift up what that change has looked like for different employers, for partners in the community. So it stops being this just sort of amorphous, yeah, we feel like we can do better, and sure, skills feels like a better way to go than proxies that we know aren't really a great way to predict on the job performance. But I think it's the how that we're now starting to have a deeper conversation about, and we're starting to have examples that we can point to. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that, I mean, I've been really encouraged, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later too, to see some of the shifts that are happening in state governments across the country. This move to remove degree requirements from government roles, because I think it is an important, tangible first step toward reimagining how we hire. And hopefully as we start to talk about what is possible here in New York, I think that is a really exciting opportunity for us to explore.
Thanks, Abby. Well, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the how. Maybe Beth, I'll bring you in on this, and I want to come back to the topic of what government could be doing here in New York as well. But Beth, about how companies start to do this. You've been working on this now for many years. Obviously, the efforts that you've undertaken at Grads of Life, at Europe, wouldn't work if they didn't work for employers. It has to make sense for meeting their talent needs. So to what extent are you able to make a business case to those employers that a skills-first approach is good for business? How do you make that argument today? What's working in your experience to bring employers on board or bring them further along in that journey? What have you learned so far in this work?
Yeah, I mean, I nod a lot at what Abby was saying, right? I think people are seeing that to expand their talent pool, you have to rethink how you're hiring, rethink your hiring practices, rethink who you're looking at. And so I think in a market where you are looking for talent, that it's the business case in some ways is easy, right? This is a way to expand your pool. The challenge is though, okay, what do I do now? And just taking a degree off of a job description, like that's not going to do it. That's a great first step, but you have to change all of the practices. And I'm going to keep adding on to what Abby said, but it really, it is the next step. It is the how, and I think we all inherently know people are using degrees as a proxy, and it isn't actually like, what are the skills for this job? Like, it's a good exercise generally for a company to do, but it does take a lot of work. So our business case is around sort of time to hire, expanding your pool, thinking differently about that. Also, there's obviously been a huge push around diversity and thinking about expanding the diversity of your labor force. And having a degree excludes 60% of Americans overall, over 70% of Black Americans, and over 80% of Latinos. Like, it's just it's a natural, like, if you're committed to DEI, if you say you want a diverse workforce, this is a great way to make the first step. And I think that has come more into a business case and has changed over the last 3 to 4 years than I think what we were talking about before. So I've seen a lot of movement. We did a paper called Dismissed by Degrees in 2017 with HBS and Accenture, and that was about degree inflation, and that was kind of a new idea. And now the conversation has changed a lot, and it's changing really quickly in a good way. And now we at Grads of Life, and I encourage everyone to take advantage of okay, you're interested in this, you want to do this. Rubber meets the road. What do you actually need to do to change your job descriptions, change how you hire? And that's where we sort of come in to work with companies.
Thanks, Beth. Joey, let me ask you something building off of Beth's point there about what the national numbers show. Unfortunately, here in New York City, something similar. A bachelor's degree requirement leaves out about 68% of working age Black New Yorkers in the city, and a similar share, even higher share of Hispanic New Yorkers as well. We've got something like 2.3 million working age adults in New York City that don't have a bachelor's degree. And in your work at the New York City Employment and Training Coalition and now advising the mayor, obviously you're focused on building pathways to better jobs, which in this town in particular, even more so it seems in recent years, have typically, at least on paper, required a bachelor's degree. So how do you think about solving for that problem? Can a shift toward a skills-based, skills-first approach help move the needle on expanding pathways to good jobs for New York? How are you approaching this issue as you think about giving good counsel to the mayor on this?
Yeah, I think hey, Marjorie.
Hey, Marjorie.
I think in terms of, if the first question being, can skills-based hiring work? The answer is yes. It's been done. There are blueprints for this. It's occurred in certain businesses. The labor unions have done this for many, many years. There's strategies that work that can be deployed at large scale, at large employers, small scale at small employers, and also cities and states and governments can think of this as well. So how you do that at a certain scale changes the conversation. And obviously that's something that we have to dig deeper in and have a better and clearer understanding, and working closely with the Deputy Mayor for Workforce and Economic Development and Abby Jo Siegel and the talent team there to help to try to solve that challenge. But we have to do it. The labor market suggests that we have to do it because we have to expand our processes and our hiring. We have a tremendous number of folks who are skilled and capable who are currently not lining up perfectly to certain positions. You have a certain number of positions that are available and they're not finding the talent that they require. That impacts businesses' ability to deliver. Their revenue is affected. Obviously, the lack of talent at a particular level for an extended period of time is impacting the ability for them to contribute regularly and grow their business in this economy. So it's something that we have to do, and we have to do well. And we're looking at how to do so with our partners. You mentioned New York City Employment and Training Coalition and other organizations that understand how to work with people who are in different areas and have different talent needs and different needs and require different skills and different training. And there's folks who understand that on the ground, and we have to do a better job of just partnering with them effectively in order to ensure that there is a clear pathway, not just into the private sector jobs that are online, but also thinking about government as an employer. We're no different than any other employer across this country that is struggling to acquire talent right now. And we're thinking very strategically around how we do a better job of not just lining up folks that have traditionally had the degrees and the requirements to those types of positions, but thinking about how we start to bring in the population of New Yorkers that have considered this a place that has been their home forever, and see a pathway potentially to employment, not just in the private sector, but see the city as a beacon and a place where they want to work for and contribute to. So it's a large problem to solve with lots of other hands on deck here to help contribute to this, but it's something that we're looking at very closely.
Thanks, Joey. I want to come back to this point about what government can do, including in its own hiring pipeline, but I also just want to introduce and welcome Marjorie Parker. Marjorie, it's great to have you with us. Marjorie is the president and CEO of Jobs First NYC, a nonprofit advancing solutions that create economic mobility for young adults and for their communities. And Marjorie has more than 25 years of experience leading adult and youth services initiatives in nonprofits, educational organizations, and in government as well. So welcome, Marjorie. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Eli.
I won't put you on the hot seat with a question right away. In fact, I want to turn to you, Delkas. I'm not going to put you on the spot to represent all of the employers in New York City, but as someone working for a major employer here on this panel, I really want to get your perspective on how this is playing out within a company that's making these decisions, thinking about these issues every day. Obviously, MasterCard's done quite a few things in recent years to prioritize skills in hiring, in internal promotion and advancement policies. Tell us a little bit more about how is this playing out internally at MasterCard? How do you think about shifting the culture toward a skills-first approach? Is it working, and what have your experiences been?
Thank you, Eli. So we are still learning, is what I will say here. I think to Abby and Beth's point, companies are looking at this as an opportunity to really diversify our workforce and to bring forward different perspectives. And this is important, especially for us as we're thinking about things like creating products that serve the needs of our consumers and products that serve the needs of our customers, mainly on the commercial side. And those things matter when you have faces at the table, different lived experiences that can bring forward different ideas, perspectives that inform how we're doing this work. It makes a difference. And so where we are today is on a journey. MasterCard has been looking at skills-based hiring for now 10 years. And more recently, we entered into an agreement with the city of New York, specifically with LaGuardia Community College, to look at an apprenticeship program that has students coming into a summer boot camp of sorts to learn the technical skill sets that they need to go into the technology workforce. And so what that means for us is we started with hiring for apprentices over the course of 2014, and this started off in St. Louis. We had some learnings there from our technology hub, which sits in Missouri, and now to hiring over 150 technology talent into the company through apprenticeship programs. And so our hope with the partnership that we have with LaGuardia Community College now is that today we have 12 students that are coming in. They are still in school. They are pursuing their associate's degree through an applied associate's degree program, and they are coming in to MasterCard to work for us and learn the technical skills that they need to become developers, engineers, and create the products that we want to put forward into the globe, because we are a global corporation. And our hope is that those 12 students will gain the skill sets real time through their education, but also on hands. They are paid, and they come into our offices, which are just up the street here on 5th and 20th, and they're getting real-time learning, skills-based learning, and we hope to convert them to full-time employees next year.
That's really exciting to hear, Eudelkis. Thanks. And I think you're bringing up an important point as well, that a skills-first approach isn't only beneficial to job seekers without college degrees. There's a real value there in layering that on top of an associate's degree or potentially also a bachelor's degree. And I think we could talk more about that as well. Marjorie, I do want to bring you in. You've had a moment to catch your breath, hopefully, and ask a little bit about what this looks like at the neighborhood level and from the provider perspective, thinking about the workforce ecosystem in New York. We've got wonderful community-based, neighborhood-based workforce development organizations focused on connecting New Yorkers with skills and with job opportunities. Many of those organizations, though, and from what I've heard, are challenged by the need to kind of layer on the skills-based approach, whether that's assessing the needs of their own candidates, folks that come to them looking for support, being able to work closely with employers to say, we're actually able to meet not just generally speaking your hiring demands, but provide you with candidates that have the specific skills that you're looking for. So, and you work in these issues all over the 5 boroughs. So can you give us a sense of how is that playing out on the ground for those organizations that are on the front lines of building skills? What kind of supports do they need? What experiences are those organizations and yours obviously having with building a skills-first approach into the workforce sector?
Thank you, Eli. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan and team, for putting together this event, and for everyone who came out this morning, despite the weather, to be here with us. Thank you for coming. JobSearch has been working. Eli, I was reflecting on our conversation last week, and I started to think that for the nonprofit sector, skills has been our premium. It's been our calling card to the marketplace, right? Colleges usually go out with degrees. We usually go out trying to convince employers to hire our people because they're skilled, right? They have work experience. Their experience has been augmented by certification or credentials, and that they should want to hire them. That has been, on our end, our calling card. It hasn't really been the employer calling card, because college became a premium over skills, in the sense that skills didn't matter a lot to some employers if you didn't have the college degree with it. So the college degree validated the skills that people were coming with and the experience people were coming with. For the last 10 years, when JobSearch was founded, we were founded because there are a lot of young people in New York City who are out of school and out of work. Our focus wasn't trying to get them to college, it was trying to get them to work, because they needed to work, they needed to connect to opportunities, or they needed to connect to education. For the last 10 years, we've been looking at two things, right? One is, Eli, when we launched the Young Adult Sectoral Employment Project in 2013, we knew then that skills was going to be a premium focus on hiring ahead. What we didn't understand was how was employers deciding what skills they need and what skills they didn't need. And so our key takeaway from that project was that we needed to have a better understanding of how employers were prioritizing skills. In 2014, a lot of our nonprofit partners came to us, and this was when we first started thinking about AI, because 2014 is like 100 years in AI age. So a lot of our partners said, everybody who's applying for a job must apply online now. We don't understand why they get turned down. And that's when we really started thinking about, we did actually research. We wrote a paper called Online But Disconnected. And we talked to about 100 employers. Then we decided to talk to the companies that wrote the assessment for the employers. So it's the black box of AI that nobody understood what was happening with it, and still is a problem. And we came out of that having conversation around how can we game the AI? Can we go in and put in the specific skills in the way that it assesses information so that young people would have a better chance of getting a job, right? So fast forward to 2019, we are looking at adaptive AI technology by SkyHive. And SkyHive was working with big corporations inside their companies, assessing and disaggregating skills of their current employees. So they were taking each job titles, and they were talking to employees, and they were redefining what skills they needed to do the jobs they were doing. So you may have gone in with a college degree, and we know that all of us up here have college degrees. Sometimes, I think you learn some things in college, but there are lots of things you don't learn in college, especially if you have a political science degree like I do. But what we learn from those two things, Daniel isn't here yet. He may have been in some traffic like myself, but we asked SkyHive, could you use your technology in our sector? Like, could we adapt it to the workforce development sector? Because they've largely been working in the private sector. And so Sean Hinton, great guy, said, sure, Marjorie, how do we do this? So we worked with Daniel and his team and tested it at Eastside House as we try to figure out how would this actually work on the ground. Well, it was a big success. What the students told us was the technology shrunk the time between their understanding of what skills they have and what skills were in demand in the marketplace. So they began understanding that there are the sectors that they're working that their skills connected to, but their skills connected to other jobs in other sectors that they had no idea that they would be qualified for. But even better, what SkyHive did was tell them, you are 80% qualified for this. And the immediate question was, well, how do I get the next 20%? And on the same platform, you could click training, and it tells you which ones are free, which ones are proximate to your neighborhood. So you don't have to go to 10 different programs to figure out, okay, I only need to go to this one to get this one thing that will get me to 100%, or that will get me to 75%. So that's really how we began looking at understanding this gaming the skills conversation we're having. So that SkyHive came along and helped us to understand that there's a better way to do it. So what we're doing now is we're launching the largest skills mapping initiative in the country, and it's happening here in New York City. And what we're doing is looking across 18 communities in New York City that have a high number of people who are unemployed. But we're less interested in the unemployed and more interested in skills prevalence in that neighborhood, right? Because the question is, if you can understand what skills exist in a neighborhood, could you develop an upskilling plan for that neighborhood? Could you predetermine, based on what's already there, what you're going to bring to that neighborhood in terms of education and in terms of skills training. So I dare to say that no program, training program or college program should show up to a neighborhood without first understanding what the skills prevalence is, right? You don't need 10 different programs in the neighborhood offering the same thing. It's not good for those people in the neighborhood. So we're working on that with Sky High. We're also working on looking at the skills first approach. We're working with 110, as Grads of Life is doing as well, to really, and this is really exciting because it's live, right? You're working with 70 employers who are in the midst of disaggregating their skills and removing the college degree. And I'm by no means advocating that people shouldn't go to college and get a college degree. I have a few, but I would say that you shouldn't have to go if you've worked 20 years and have the skills that qualifies you for a job, and the only thing keeping you from that job is a college degree. So 110 really aims to do that with Black talent. The goal is to hire 1 million Black talent in really good paying jobs over the next 10 years. In New York City, there's not a single job that pays below $63,000 a year. It's a good starting point for a lot of people. And so the last thing I want to say about what we're working on across neighborhoods is the Young Adult Sectoral Employment Project. When we launched that, we've been thinking about how to expand that project and how to work in a more coordinated way with employers so that we can develop a negotiating mechanism from our side of the world. I mean, think about it. When an employee is looking for talent, we're not the default place. Colleges, LinkedIn, apps, whatever, but we're not the default place. How do we become a default place, right? How do we show up in that metrics of colleges, LinkedIn, the nonprofit sector, right? That's how we need to start showing up. So one thing that we're working on is this last 2 years we launched 3 sector networks, one focused in tech, one focused in the green economy, and one focused on healthcare. The idea is to really determine, taking the skills mapping, laying it over across sectors, understand what skills are in demand in those sectors, and then use that information to inform what we do back on our side of the world in terms of training and development, to make sure that we're connecting people to the jobs and that we're keeping the kind of open information, open understanding across the field that here's what's in demand, here's what employers are looking for. But we want to do something a little bit different, right? Listen, government and philanthropy largely pays for the training that happens in our sector. What we want to be able to do, as my union friends told me, that our sector need to organize in a way that we can negotiate with employers. So what we want the networks to do is to be able to negotiate. If you're part of the healthcare network, we want you to be able to negotiate with the healthcare employers so that if Memorial Sloan is looking for 5,000 new positions, they would say there's a sector network in New York City that could probably supply us with, 3,000 of those people. Let's go and talk to them. On our end, we can organize to respond to that training. Of course, we'd want Memorial Sloan to pay for some of it, because that's the holy grail in our business, to get employers to pay for training. So that's really what we're looking at, is how do we take these ideas into practice, and then how do we take what we learn from practice back into policy and investment so that we can get more of what works and get rid of the things that don't work as well.
Thanks, Marjorie. We're going to shift into that conversation, I think, around policy and investment. And I wanted to just ask one more question up front. Maybe this is for Beth, for Abby, maybe for you, Delkas, as well, about where employers are right now, what's needed to kind of help accelerate more of these shifts. And maybe, Beth, I'll start with you, because you mentioned that removing the degree requirements is just the first step, and maybe that's the easiest step, and there's a lot of difficult work that comes after that point. But I'm definitely struck looking at some of the data on how powerful removing those degree requirements can be. And we don't see the same level of kind of shift across companies and even within a single industry or a single occupation. But when you do see, where you do see companies making those changes, the shifts can be pretty profound. I mean, I was looking at some of the data, and for instance, at IT positions hired by Accenture, a few years ago, all of those candidates were required to have a bachelor's degree. Now 76% of their hires in IT don't have to have a bachelor's degree. And that's just in the span of a few years. We've seen similar things in other industries and in other companies, but also we've seen other employers that hire a lot of IT and tech workers where it's still at 96%, 98%, 100%. So I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about that first step. What does it actually take to go through with, and this really could be a question for all three of you, to go through with removing those degree requirements in the first place? What does a company have to do to assess their current hiring needs and make that choice? And then what have you seen is necessary for that decision to stick?
Yeah, I would say leadership is key here in that if a CEO ideally or if a senior HR leader says we're going to do this, it will likely happen. It's prioritization because it is another thing to do, and the easiest thing is the status quo, right? And so we have seen the sort of commitment from leadership saying we're gonna do this. It's a change management activity, right? So how then are you gonna implement it? We have a tool that we work with companies on to say, here are the jobs that are sort of most ripe for re-credentialing. So pick the jobs based on sort of on some of these metrics and using data, and then start with some of your champions, right? Say, you don't need to start with the hardest person who's really good, right? You start with some champions, get some wins, and you can slowly figure out how to work it out. But like anything else in your business, right, it needs a priority and it needs a plan. And so I think a lot of people have come and say, yeah, we want to do this. We don't know where to start, which Abby mentioned as well. And I think, it like anything else in your business, when you're going to implement something new, it does require a plan. And I love the Marjorie, like the workforce has been talking in skills for years, and it is new to think about skills for these jobs, to really go through what does that IT job require? What are the skills? How do we go find that? And so I think if as much as leadership can get behind this, then usually you find that it happens.
If I could add on there, two thoughts. One, at Indeed last year, we, for our own jobs, and we have about 15,000 employees globally, removed degree requirements from over 700 of our job profiles, which equates to the majority of the roles at Indeed. And I think that for us, it had to start at home and putting that forward as we think about how we can make skills-based hiring more central in the platform that we run to help employers around the world hire. Another thing is, what is the experience, to your point, Marjorie, of posting a job online? We have found, not surprisingly, that if the first thing that you offer to an employer when they are going to post a job is, does this job require a college degree, yes or no? Knockout question. Well, many, many more employers are going to say yes if that is the first question that you ask them. If you simply take that question out of the flow, the number of jobs all of a sudden that require a college degree goes down pretty significantly. So I think there is I don't want to downplay the complexity here, but I also think it is interesting to take a look at those places where we are encouraging the status quo, and if we just sort of offer it up differently, where might we land?
So building off of that, I think, and thinking about what maybe the next step is, thinking about, not asking that question of employers first, or making those decisions with strong leadership to say, well, we're setting a goal here. And by the way, I should introduce Dan Diaz. Daniel, I won't make you answer a question right off the bat, but I will say Daniel Diaz is the executive director of Eastside House Settlement. We're thrilled to have you here with us, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
I was actually at the Indeed space on 11/20. I was early for that one.
How was that meeting?
Oh, it was amazing. They thought I wanted a job or something. I said I didn't have the skills based for it.
So, Div, thanks for being here. But I'll bring you into this in a second, Dan. I'll let you kind of get your bearings for a second. But let me ask this question about kind of what follows the removal of degree requirements. So there's some encouraging data out there on this front. There's a major survey conducted every year of HR professionals. And last year in 2022, it found, I think for the first time, that more than half of all of the HR leaders that were surveyed had said that they use pre-employment assessments now to gauge job applicants' knowledge and skills. That was, I think, the first time that number had crossed 50%. And maybe even more encouragingly, about 4 in 5 of those professionals had said that scores on skills assessments are just as or more important than traditional hiring criteria that definitely included a bachelor's degree. So that seems encouraging. It seems like there's a major shift happening among those kind of folks in business that are making these decisions and implementing these things every day. But I wanted to ask you guys about what those assessments might look like. What is the alternative then? If a bachelor's degree is not a particularly strong predictor of fit or future success in a role, what is a better predictor? How obviously companies can't just revert to manually screening every single application, but to the extent that there are technical tools that have, among other things, filtered out applicants that don't have a degree requirement, well, that has to be replaced with something, right? So can you help us understand what is that being replaced with? What kinds of skills assessments are employers choosing to implement at this point? Are they working? Is that an area where you see a lot of potential for further development? And I'm looking at the left side of my panel only because I think you all work so closely with employers or are making these decisions every day, but I'd love to get anybody's input on that.
I mean, I don't know if I have an answer on, like technology assessments that are working that, people are like, oh yes, we do this definitely. Instead, there's a bunch of different assessments out there that I think people use to try not to screen out. I think we've also seen partnerships with various sort of workforce training providers, or with that to say to Marjorie's point, if you're like, we need all these jobs, they go to the sort of healthcare sector alliance and they say, here are the skills we need to try to partner and fill these at scale. So I think I think we've seen various tech solutions to this, but I think we also encourage sort of broader partnerships that can help. Once you know what skills you need, you can go out and say to various providers, like, here are the skills we need. Again, that's not something necessarily companies have been able to do before explicitly. And then you can go to various partnerships that Marjorie was talking about that can help you fill those gaps.
Can I chime in?
Sure, Marjorie, thanks.
I think it's important to understand that when we conducted that online but disconnected report, there are not a lot of companies. It's very few companies, right? It's a small business, but a lot of money, billions of dollars, that write the assessment tests that most companies use. And those tests are on skills and they're on personality. So while online but disconnected, our primary focus on that research was on the personality assessment part of the test, which we think you should get rid of all of those. A lot of employers, even when we try to talk to the companies to understand how they make up these tests, we only spoke to the lawyers who would give us no information and say it's proprietary. So I think you're talking about this next level of kind of deep dive into what's the alternative beyond the partnerships, beyond the specific relationship with, such as the one that 110 is doing with 70 employers, or such as the one that you might be doing with LaGuardia, is that other part of it. And I think employers have to take the lead on that, because that the systems that they now have should kind of shrink the time between, across the number of people they have to interview, between interview and hire. And those systems have been in place, and it has just grown and grown and grown. So I think that the employees have to decide.
And
that
don't
they're not
replace the
gonna do it.
degree
Yeah.
requirement with
Yeah.
another requirement
Right.
that's
Yeah.
also like that. I mean, I think that's where you don't want to say, like, we're not doing degrees, but now we're doing this other complicated thing that people don't understand. So I think it's really trying to really open up the pool. And again, that's why I know I keep pushing this up. But like, you have to change how you think about hiring. You really, really do. And we did some work with the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, and they went door to door in Cleveland to start to get more people to come in. And they really changed the way they thought about talent, they thought about hiring. And I think that's I guess sort of our push.
If I could jump in.
Yeah, go ahead,
I was just going to say that I think so much of this developed over time, having been on the practitioner side of it as well, so much of it developed over time just based on trust. You develop these programs, people understood that, certain individuals were potentially successful in some of these, with some of these employers. And then you establish really strong relationships, and guidance was then provided, through those relationships, and started to scale it to a size that was still manageable, but wasn't necessarily going to crack the nut that we needed to crack. And the same thing we talk about in terms of diversifying businesses and generally, and seeing diversity as an asset in terms of having talent on the team, you also have to diversify the hiring practices that go along with that. And within that, in order to do so, you have to diversify that team, because hiring teams often, they have systems in place that have been incredibly successful. We talked already about degrees and not wanting to remove that from the requirement, and that's important. Degrees are still the highest barometer for success. But having individuals within these teams that are operating within the same exact system that they've operated within for decades, who are looking towards specific types of talent that either resemble similar backgrounds in terms of educational experience and cultural experience and all of the different pieces, we have to crack that nut as well. And so there's a number of pieces here that are at play that are required to change in order for us to address the scale issue, because we're really never going to get to the place that we needed to unless we address issues around skills training, degrees, hiring practices, culture within employers, and their willingness to accept and adapt to cultural shifts that occur when you're hiring new talent. But in order to do all of that, it requires everyone at the table. And people who have done it well, people who have not done it well, also provide a tremendous amount of experience and understanding and guidance. And this is the time to do it. I think there's an appetite for it that we've never seen before. During a time that has come through this really tumultuous few years, that was also on top of a period of time that skills training was really growing at a level that it hadn't before, and reached specific types of employers that it hadn't done before. The appetite has grown within the tech industry, finance industry, other areas that have done it for many, many years, but it's continuing to grow as we bring more sectors online and industries online. And we just need all the right folks around the table in order to crack that nut.
Well, let's try to break down some of the, and I want to bring you in on this. Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole if not now, when conversation, when are we going to do it? Right now seems like the perfect time. We have employers that are dying for employees. They are trying to find people to work. They're trying to find people with skills that can work. But there is that impediment of the degree that sits there on almost every single job description that we see that we're trying to help people get into. And one of the things that we're continuing to see is employers now coming to us and asking us, you asked who's using, what kind of examples. So, and for instance, New York Presbyterian has been working with us on changing their hiring practices. We've worked with them where they have 800 job order and only 11 people get jobs because the degree requirement stops it right there. And so for them having a conversation with us about how they can change their hiring practices, and I know that's a one-off, but that's a pretty big one-off when you talk about a health employer that's thinking about using a skills-based approach to fill a lot of even their entry-level positions that require college degrees. So that's just one example of what we're looking at to change.
No, that's a great example, Dan. And I want to kind of start to break down a little bit more of what this skills-first policy agenda might look like. And Joe, you're right to talk about. There's a lot of different elements here, a lot of different nuts to crack. Well, let's start cracking some of them. I think at least pushing in some of these areas. So let me throw out a couple of examples. I'm opening this up to everybody on the panel, but areas where maybe more could be done or where this should be part of this agenda. So one of those things, and Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts about this as well, is what more is needed to support the workforce sector in making this shift? And Joe, I'm sure you've got thoughts about this as well, but maybe that's about actually being able to implement high quality assessments in the first place so that when job seekers come to you, what their skills are. How do you actually make that assessment? Is there more support needed there? Another thought is in the public sector, public side of the workforce system. If you're a job seeker and you go to one of the city's Workforce One centers, how sophisticated is the assessment of your own existing skills when you enter into that space? I think at this point, for most of those job seekers, that's not the experience that they're having. They get a list of open jobs. A lot of them are concentrated in a handful of employers or industries, in retail or security guards. But while there is obviously a lot more in the city's publicly supported workforce space, how much of it is on a kind of a continuum of assessing that individual candidate's skills and helping map out where they need to go? Those are sort of maybe two examples. A third one is, what more could government do around shifting employers in this direction? Obviously, it's not a mandate to say, hey, now you need to drop degree requirements and change, But this is a mayor who's got, I think, really strong relationships with the business community in New York City. There's a lot of goodwill there. There's a potential to be able to come in and make bigger asks or help to facilitate more of these conversations. Potentially, there's also a need for some kind of technical assistance, and Beth, I'm curious for your thoughts there, that would actually help employers, maybe help employers that are further along in this journey provide more technical assistance to those that aren't. So a whole bunch of different ideas out here, but I'd love to just break down any one of these pieces that sounds to any of you like this should be part of a skills first policy agenda for New York to accelerate this work in New York. What are some of the things that are needed right now?
You're asking me specifically.
Well, Dan,
I mean,
you can jump in.
I can jump.
I was going to say, as someone
All right.
who's running one
Let
of
me
the
stand
organizations
up.
doing
No.
this,
So I think
and maybe I can start, Dan, with you in terms
I'll start.
of what would an organization like yours need to actually be able to do more of this
I mean,
work?
we need to be resourced well in the space. An executive director said that. No way. But you know, I think, and there also needs to be a change in the conversation. So, you know, people love specifics. So I'm going to give specifics here. And so we have a Jobs Plus program at Eastside House, and that is run by HRA. And so we then have to take the positions that we're looking to hire to help people get jobs, and we then have to take those resumes and send them to HRA to get them approved to be hired. And right at the top are degrees. And so if we're talking about a skills first, a skills-based workforce, how is it that we are now going to require from a government perspective the hiring of individuals with only degrees to do positions that really could be done with just skills-based training? And then, you know, you're basically dictating how we're hiring for these specific positions. So it is going to take a conversation with the mayor's office about some of the contracts that have been in place for quite some time, about how to become innovative, about how to change the mindset about who's getting hired and what are the requirements for those hirees. When I look at the overall scope of the not-for-profit landscape, and there are a bunch of not-for-profit people in this group, and they're all gonna, you know, it's almost like preaching to the choir here. When you're getting paid 75 cents on the dollar to hire individuals, you then set your pay scale a certain way. And so it sets people at a disadvantage for if they do have a degree, why would they go there? So it really sets you up in a weird way. And then for people that come from the Bronx, that's us, BX baby, people that come from the Bronx and that are working in the Bronx, you have that other added layer of people saying, well, they'd rather be in the city to work there. So a more equitable pay scale, a more equitable view of how things are being resourced to the not-for-profit community could then help individuals make that transition to a skills-based hiring platform, which then could ultimately help educate other young people and other potential partners about what we're really talking about when people need or have the skills to be hired. So it's a lot wrapped in, but I think the government really could help, especially now, with being innovative and thinking a little bit outside of the box for how they prescribe their own hiring practices on CBOs.
That's great, Dan. It's a really helpful example with the requirements from HRA. I mean, Joe, I don't want to make you make policy here on the stage, but
I'm
just
not going to.
but I would love, you know, maybe just broad thoughts that you may have here.
That wasn't
about,
thrown at you,
know,
Joe.
Are there
Well,
other
you know.
things that you think where you see that the workforce sector could be supported in helping to make this transition possible, or where you think maybe government has a role to play in supporting the work that's happening in the private sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think government has a role to play in each of those areas. It also has a role to play as an employer itself. I mean, we're working in partnership with a number of different organizations, including on most recently on an apprenticeship goal that we've set, because we believe in this. We know that we need to make these types of internal shifts in order for us to do a more effective job of not only being a quality employer and delivering good services to the city, but also just, you know, being good to the people that require this type of that are looking for us as a source for their livelihood and moving in the work direction. So we've set some particular goals over the last couple of months. The mayor state of the city recently announced our apprenticeship moonshot, which is a goal to really make New York City a kind of a center of gravity for apprenticeships in this country. It is obviously, we're well behind in other areas. California is in a different stratosphere in terms of apprenticeship goals. And we've worked with and are communicating with some of our peers and partners over there. We're working closely with other areas of the country as well that are doing this more effectively. But we want to bring this into the city's ecosystem so we can ensure that each of the agencies are doing a more effective job or pulling folks that have quality talent and are willing to not only work but learn on the job. Because earning and learning is really key to the demographic that you've talked about with the nonprofit sector, having worked in that, being able to develop the skills that are required for employers. They need to be able to earn. So the apprenticeship provides a pathway for us to do that more effectively as an employer itself. We can also do better by working more closely with employers, and we're doing a lot of that as well. We're working with the CEO of Jobs Council. I see Kirsten over there. We're working with a number of different other partners. As you mentioned, the mayor and the deputy mayor are believe very deeply in the role that business can play in helping to develop the city and for us to grow. And business has to be a partner in this. We have to work closely with our friends in labor unions that have been doing this for an extensive period of time. As we mentioned before, I mean, the development of talent on the job is something that there's been a blueprint for some time, and we can think about creative ways to bring that into the private sector. And we have to work closely with our nonprofit partners. They are organizations that have been working with us for decades and have the talent on board. They're individuals that understand how government works, because many of the nonprofit sector leadership are people who have worked in government at certain periods of time that can help us more effectively transition into this new pace that we're looking to hire at and also develop talent at. But there are a number of challenges that are at bay in doing this, and we have to call all those challenges out. We also have to in addition to trying to make these shifts, we also have to bring folks back into many of these positions that we're experiencing similar vacancy rates and attrition rates that other companies have experienced over time. So it's as I mentioned earlier, it is the right time to do it, but it also is an exceptionally challenging time for a variety of different reasons as well.
Eli, can I share, from a technology perspective, one of the things we have heard from our nonprofit partners, from our workforce development partners, is that it is not particularly easy to get on our platform and show that you have participated in this program and the skills that you have developed in this program. It's real easy to say what is the highest degree level that you have attained, but that is a gap, and that's a gap that we are actually working on. We have a pilot underway that we call Skill Connect. Some of our partners are in the room today. Perscolis has been a really great partner to us to think about what is that onboarding experience from a workforce development program to a platform like Indeed, so that you can demonstrate those skills. And you all know, as you've said, the skills that folks have developed in those programs. So sure, assessments is a piece of this, but one of the things that we're trying to do right now is to say, okay, so you graduated from Perscolis, let's make it really easy for you to go on, as you're building your profile, say, I went to Perscolis, that populates automatically in your education field, and the skills that you have built populate automatically into your skill field. So now you have the ability to make matches based on skills versus degrees on the platform. So I think that is one bridge that we hope to build between programs that are serving job seekers so well and getting into a hiring system that has thus far been too focused on the degree as the proxy.
That's a really good point that Abby makes. We're actually making investments to that point and upgrading our platforms for when applicants come in from outside of the organization. They can, in fact, highlight certifications that they have versus just a bachelor's degree or more. And so that is such a huge barrier to entry that we're finding requires investments from the private sector in order to allow for those opportunities to really come forward and sort of invite other applicants into the organization. And to your point, for us at MasterCard, we are part of the New York CEO Jobs Council as well, and it does take this partnership between private and public to bring forward these opportunities and to bring on board CEOs that are committed to this work, that are making the right investments and the right commitments at a larger scale to bring in the apprenticeship opportunities for us in our space in technology roles.
That's great, Douglas. Thanks. I think we have just time for some questions from our audience. So here's how this will work. I know we have a lot of questions. See the hands going up already. Keep your hands up. My colleagues will come around with microphones. Just let us know very quickly your name, if you're here with an organization, and please keep your questions short so we can get to as many as possible. And we'll have about 50 minutes or so. So I see the hands up. I see one hand over there on the right side, a second in, and we'll come over. I see you all behind me as well. So when we start there, we'll come to the very end here next. And my colleague's got a microphone. You can just hand it there. All right, but we'll start over there. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Levine-Hinckley. I'm with Western Governors University. I've heard a lot about the variety of platforms being used to help operationalize skills-based practices, and I know there are a number of proprietary taxonomies out there. I was wondering if you all were experiencing any operational challenges related to a lack of a common open language around skills, especially one that's complex and rich, that's based off of more than just root words.
So I will try to answer that. I'm not a I'm not a technology person. I'm an HR professional, but we are, for instance, living through this right now. As I mentioned, we are integrating a new platform into our organization, which looks to open up sort of the application requirements. And so we are working with a company by the name of Gloat, who is helping us with that integration of this platform, but it's proving very challenging for other reasons. We work behind the scenes with other HR platforms that are not necessarily connecting with what we're trying to bring forward, and these things take time. And so I don't know if that helps answer your question. Again, I'm not a techie, but certainly, yes, we are faced with those sort of language barriers around the technology and the integration of those technologies. So it takes time, but we continue to press forward. It takes time and investments.
That's great. Thanks for the question. Let me just see a show of hands again so I can kind of get a sense of who's in the room. So we'll go to the left side, and then I'll take the first row over here. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name's Jose Garcia. I'm with Angel Hack. We're crowdsourced, open-sourced innovation company. And my question is about if there's a way to, so going back to the skills-based policy agenda, I think interest is actually a key part, like the candidate's interest is a key part, because not everybody learns the same. You know, people that are much more interested in that job or that role are going to learn a lot more. So how are we either quantifying or qualifying for interest? Because I noticed that, you know, if you look at volunteer-based organizations where people, you know, volunteer-based roles are very much like a job, that's very much interest-driven, and, you know, that's been successful for a long time. So are we taking lessons learned from, you know, for example, professional association boards, which are all about volunteerism, and applying that to hiring?
I can attempt to answer the question.
It was Marjorie, too.
Take it to it. So if I understand what you're asking, are you talking about the skills you develop as a volunteer?
So interest-based.
Interest-based.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's what skills taxonomy will do, you know, is that whether it's the platform that Abby's talking about or SkyHive that I'm talking about, is you can go on, and if you checking, you know, all the things, like you tell it what you're looking for, it pops you up a list of skills, and you check the ones that apply to whatever your experience is, and that taxonomy gets built over time, and then it may ask you some questions along the way that helps to trigger your thinking around, well, to your point about, maybe it's your point about the job, the entire description pops up. If you put Perscolas in, you get all these things that pop up. Well, that happens too when you put a nurse. I used to be a nurse, or I'm a volunteer nurse. It pops you up a list of what they think are associated skills with that, and you may not be thinking that you have those skills, but you'll see it. Or you'll take a class at Perscolis, and you didn't think too much about that class, but then Perscolis pops up and goes, oh yeah, I took that skill, that skill, that skill, and then it builds your profile. So even in the trust, and I love the place where you started from, right? Is that from the job seeker perspective, who is making a choice about where they want to be, right? And it's kind of what I like now about where job seekers are, because they're currently in a position of power. If we can lock that in and keep that, then maybe we could shift some systems moving forward with big employers.
Let me just add on to that, that the interest side, if we're talking about an age-based approach, the younger side really we're seeing they're not really sure what they're interested in. So figuring out a platform where interests could be gauged for the younger 16 to 24 population as opposed to those have already had experience in the past might be a good differentiating variable.
And potentially with the expansion of the city's focus on apprenticeships, especially youth apprenticeships, that's another vehicle for doing that, right? Folks are able
That would be a great vehicle.
to explore, a career, but from the perspective of what ignites their passion, and also they're not only building skills, but able to actually demonstrate that. It
And
seems
giving
like a
young
potential
people a
opportunity.
chance to delta in the middle of it when they really figure out that they're not interested in blood and guts, that they're interested in something else. It'll be great to make sure that there are deltas along the way so that young people can change their interests, like their minds, like many of us did, changing our majors 3 and 4 times.
That's great. Well, thank you for the question. So, gentleman in the front here, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wilson. I'm from a new company being formed, Complexity, which is a systems thinking, knowledge networking company. So I'm going to be devil's advocate and ask you questions, long-term unintended consequences that come up. Number one, loss of jobs due to automation. How secure are these jobs in the next 5 years? Are you going to upgrade the skills so that they won't be automated or outsourced? Or become obsolete? Number two, could it be that you are signaling to younger generation people who want to go to college but who can't afford it, but who might invest in a college degree, but you might signal to them that they shouldn't go to college? And number three, and the biggest problem is, what is the impact in terms of business dynamism, innovativeness, competitiveness? I mean, Indeed and MasterCard are what McKinsey calls the superstar firms, but most firms are not like that. The biggest issue in the United States for the last 20 years has been loss of labor productivity, stagnant labor productivity, loss of business dynamism. And how does that affect, these long-term things? I know the great attrition, companies want to hire fast, but what about the long-term consequences of these terms? Thank you.
And if somebody wants to tackle those 3 questions in 30 seconds or less, that would be ideal. But I would also say for folks on the panel, if anybody wants to take just one of those 3, feel free. There's a lot there. But thank you for the question, sir.
Do you want to start? Go ahead.
Oh, I'm happy to. Which piece? I think I am really optimistic at the intersection of business dynamism and productivity and skills-based hiring. I think skills-based hiring is a way to bring more diversity to the workplace, both from a demographic perspective, but also from a diversity of thought and experience perspective. And I think maybe to take a slight piece of another part of your question, when we talk about skills-based hiring, we've talked about degree requirements, we've talked about different pieces. I think the gold standard here is a skills-based system where we can see where is the need for upskilling, where can these skills be transferred over to these jobs that we might not even be thinking about. So I think as we keep pushing on this, I actually feel really optimistic that this gets us to a better place in terms of matching the right people with the right skills to the right jobs with better business outcomes.
Quickly on the AI question, as you were talking, I was thinking about, we went from an agrarian society, I was working on farms, then we had the Industrial Revolution. I think this is just another phase of how the economy is changing and how AI is going to change just a whole range of things, but it also create new jobs. So part of what we need to be thinking about and educating ourselves about and being a mix of it is understanding what that looks like now, because we don't always know what it's going to look like. One example I like to use is for our sector, when tech took off, and we came to the game late. And we started trying to train people in tech. I felt like at the point where we started, it had already moved on to a lot of things, and then we were just left with a lot of the lower level entry jobs, and that we're still playing catch up. I think AI has made significant advance, but if we lean in now, we won't be playing catch up the way we played catch up on the tech front, to ensure that we understand how that's going to affect skills development, how that's going to affect jobs, current jobs. We don't always know what those future jobs are going to look like. We just don't know what we don't know. But if we go by previous experience, we know that it's going to generate new jobs. So we need to figure out how to get people trained for those. That's my best answer to the AI question. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Thank you. So I want to go back, I think, behind me. So there's a question in the back of the room, and then in the third row, and on this side, I see a question in the front. And we'll try to get as many more in there as we can.
Good morning. My name is Michael Bannock. I represent Baruch College of the City University of New York. And I just want to present a follow-up to the other gentleman's question. First of all, equity and opportunity, it's in CUNY's DNA. How does higher education help skills-based employment go on throughout these individual careers? How do we partner with these trends and to the betterment of the workers and the companies?
I will try and tackle that question. So I think overall for us, our experiences have been one where we see value in partnering with CUNY across the CUNYs across New York. And what that means for us is we are bringing a very different demographic of employee into the workplace. And I think we've talked, at least the topic or the underpinnings of biases have come up in this discussion today, not overtly, but certainly that we're hearing those themes. And so we are breaking down those barriers by bringing in profiles of talent that look very differently from the Ivy League universities that we are accustomed to hiring from, and that is important. And so there is value in the investments that these organizations are making and seeing the diversity of experiences at the table, diversity of conversations. I've touched on that earlier. So these partnerships, I think, for us are working really, really well, and I hope will continue for the long term. And then on the other side, it's creating opportunities for individuals who come from very different backgrounds and may not have the opportunities to step into these large organizations into very well-paying jobs. And so I think it's a win-win across for the private sector and for the citizens of New York.
Can I also jump in there? I think CUNY is an incredible system that is incredibly diverse in terms of also what their academic assets are, right? And so if you're looking at Baruch or Hunter or Lehman or some other, or LaGuardia and Ken over here, and shout out to Ken, that I think there's an opportunity. Ken just left. Okay, there's an opportunity to identify what types of skills that you require and partner effectively with the institution that is doing the best job of doing that. And not only just those organizations that are churning out talent directly, that are going into those specific positions at companies over here, but also helping them to develop the types of academic programs that are required for them to successfully get hired and then get retained, right? Because that's ultimately key, retention, and then also moving into different pathways within the company over time. So the employers have an opportunity there to just see a particular institution as a vehicle for accelerating talent and getting the type of talent that they are not getting to meet all the needs that they have right now, because it's never going to stop hiring from the top 25 universities. Why should it, right? It shouldn't. If individuals have incredible talent, those institutions, we should see New York City as a home for those for that talent as well. But we need to do a better job of partnering effectively with those institutions. And I would say CUNY and the institutions within it have to do a better job of recognizing that there are assets within those employers that can be leveraged in order to ensure that the curriculum continues to develop over time and doesn't remain stagnant.
I think to add to that, as a Baruch alum, go Statesman, I just wanted to say that if we can talk about how the city works with CUNY on what continuing education credentialing can be covered under TAP and Pell, or figure out what the coverage could be. We've already figured out how to make the tuition free for credit-bearing courses. Now we got to think about what skills-based courses could actually look like if we're going to change the conversation to a skills-first approach.
And the federal government may be making another push in that direction right now with
That's the
short-term
hope.
Pell.
Right.
So, and I think also just to point out that CUNY also has been implementing kind of a pilot phase skillfully, a public benefit corporation that offers a skills assessment platform, beginning of that, but as part of the CUNY upskilling push. And I think clearly as part of addressing, preparing New York for a more automated economy, strengthening upskilling infrastructure, not just for that first job into the workforce, but to help folks continue to be able to skill throughout their lives. Seems like a key part of that. So we have a question here at the front, and then I want to take one in from the second row at the back, and then we'll go right here if we have time, and then we'll come back to this side of the room. I think we've got time for probably 3 more.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for
Good
this
morning.
amazing panel. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, great. My name is Paula Whitney Best. I'm an attorney, a career advisor, and writer. I hope my question is appropriate for this panel. I'm going to go for it. With the baby boomer population growing almost exponentially, there are some retirees who left the workforce somewhat prematurely and wish to return to the workforce. What outreach are you doing to this population which is growing before our eyes? These are people with a plethora of skills and degrees and experience. That's my question. Thank you for entertaining it.
Thank you.
I will tackle that. So at MasterCard, we have a Relaunch Your Career program, which looks at the workforce that is looking to return to work. That can look like someone who took a career break for quite some time for a number of different reasons, or someone who may have retired from the workforce and now wants to return into the workplace. And so the Relaunch Your Career program looks at ways of reskilling that workforce to bring them into specific roles within the organization. And we work very closely with leadership across teams to identify those roles that are ripe for bringing in this talent back into the workforce. So that is something that we take a lot of pride of at MasterCard. And so we do think about relaunchers, as we like to call this demographic, and we've had great success actually bringing in a number of these relaunchers into the organization globally, not just in New York.
That's great. Thanks for the question. New York's older adult
Thank you.
population has grown by over a third just in the past decade. So your point is very well taken. Unfortunately, everyone, that is all the time we have for this first panel. So if you could join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us. But stick around. We're going to invite up our second panelist right now, and we'll move directly into our second conversation. And thank you all again. Good morning, everyone. All right, it's a little bit better. Thanks again to everybody for joining us today. We're going to get right into our second panel with an incredible group of 3 esteemed panelists. So let me go ahead and introduce the 3 of them, and then we'll get right into the discussion. First, we are joined by Councilmember Natasha Williams. Councilmember Williams represents her home district of Southeast Queens, Council District 27. A community leader, social justice advocate, a political organizer. Her top priorities include creating new economic opportunities, youth development, housing, and protecting older adults. Prior to her election, Councilmember Williams was executive director of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus, served as chair of the Special Initiatives Committee of Community Board 13, and founded the New York City Black Women's Political Club. Thanks so much for joining us, Councilmember. Appreciate you taking time out of your day. We're also joined today by Beth, just ask Beth about her last name, Beth Covert. Beth is acting president of the Markle Foundation, where she leads Markle's Rework America Alliance, a partnership of organizations working to help millions of people facing systemic barriers in the labor market to move into good jobs. And prior to Markle, Beth was the acting director of the Office of Personnel Management under then President Barack Obama and served as the deputy director for management at the Office of Management and Budget as well. It's just great to have you with us today, Beth. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Kirsten Barnett. Kirsten is the executive director of the New York Jobs CEO Council, which also received a shout out in the first panel. It is a nonprofit membership intermediary that is committed to hiring 100,000 low-income and diverse New Yorkers into career path jobs. Kirsten previously spent 15 years at Bloomberg and most recently led Bloomberg's Gender Equality Index. Welcome, Kirsten. Great to have you with us, too. So, Beth, I'd like to start with you. You've got a national window into these issues, and I think we could benefit from that here in New York City as much as we like to think of ourselves as the center of the universe. But let's talk a little bit about what you've learned from other places as well. We know that the Markle Foundation is working to help move workers from low-wage roles into better jobs, and that a skills-first approach is at the center of that strategy. So help us understand, why is a focus on skills the centerpiece of that strategy? And what does success look like so far?
Sure. So first, it's great to be here. I am a former New Yorker, so it's always good to come back. And I do understand the New York is the center of the universe thing. But I now live out in Denver, flyover country. And through with our partners with the Rework America Alliance and our work at Markle, we really believe that this focus on skills is absolutely critical to creating access to economic mobility and doing so in a much more equitable way. You've heard a lot about what it means. The one piece I'd say, it's skills-based everything, not just skills-based hiring. It's getting people into roles and then thinking about how they can grow and advance in their careers so that those individuals' benefits, and equally importantly, the company's benefits by tapping into the full range of talent that's available. We do our work through a coalition called the Rework America Alliance. It's a group that's come together with a shared commitment around this goal. It's sort of 39 organizations, businesses, unions, civil rights organizations, educators, et cetera. A shout out to a few of our partners who are here today, the National Urban League, Unidos US, McKinsey, Grads of Life, Perscolas, and if I've missed someone who I didn't see before, I'm sorry. And what we're doing is really trying to help the organizations that have roots in communities with employers and with workers to be more effective in making this match based on skills. So you asked about what's working, and I thought I'd share a couple of examples of what's working. And I'm gonna leave the large company examples to you. So I'll talk about some other places where we've seen this working. In the state of Colorado, where I've lived, we've worked with the state government, who's had a long commitment around skills-based hiring, to really put this into practice. We worked with the Healthcare Policy and Financing Administration. It goes by the acronym HCPF. I know. HCPF is the group that helps individuals negotiate and work their way through questions and challenges about administering things like Medicare and Medicaid. So you can imagine when someone calls HCPF, they're probably confused and frustrated that something they think should be covered isn't. We worked with them a number of years ago to really shift from the way they were hiring and managing their talent to focusing on skills. They changed the job requirements. They really figured that some of the technicalities there were things that they could train for. A college degree did not teach you the nuance of Medicaid regulations in the state of Colorado. And so what did you need the college degree for? They looked at different skills. By changing the way they hired, They were able to reduce their vacancy rate from 35% to 8%, and at the same time, reduce the abandonment rate on calls from 60% to 8%, and improved everybody's satisfaction, both employees and the citizens of Colorado who were trying to reach this group. So skills-based hiring allowed them to tap into a new talent pool that worked better for the job they were trying to do. Another example that we've seen is through some work we've done with McKinsey, who's been a great partner of us in the Rework America Alliance, who built a training program aimed at small and mid-sized businesses. It's called the Accelerator. You can find it on their website. And we worked with an engineering consulting firm, about 120 people, so not one with a big sophisticated HR department, to say, how could they make this switch to skills first? They were able, by taking these new approaches, to find 27 new employees, more diverse, broader talent that really can help that company grow where they were feeling constrained before. And my last example I'll cite is some work we're doing in Minneapolis with Goodwill Easter Seals and Urban League Twin Cities, who've really built a coalition of organizations across the city. So those two nonprofits, the Minnesota Department of Education and Employment, their economic development group, the local workforce boards, local community colleges, to say, how can we find the people who have the skills for the jobs employers are trying to fill, and how can we help employers build the partnerships with those local organizations that allows them to tap into that talent. So those are three different examples about government, a small business, and a coalition coming together, and we're excited that this can be replicated in many places, including right here in New York.
Thanks so much, Beth. That is really encouraging to hear on those examples, but I know we have some pretty promising examples right here in New York City already. So, Kirsten, I want to bring you in on this, and obviously your member organization includes many of the city's largest employers, the leaders of those organizations. What are your member companies already doing around a shift toward a skills-first approach? How's it working, and what do you see as the path from here?
Yeah. Well, first I would say that I think our members recognize the importance of them as large employers being role models in this area. Shifting to skills-based hiring is not only how they will get the talent that they need to be competitive, but it also is what will democratize the labor market, which is good for New York City. So that this is where most of their home bases are, and those that aren't home bases have very large presences here, and they're really doubled down on their commitment to this city. Three things I see them doing kind of most broadly across the companies. One is reassessing qualifications when you're thinking about jobs. I don't need to go into removing degree requirements. We covered a lot of that in the last panel, but I will say, that's top of that list. And where I think most of our employers are now is starting to look at now, how do you clear the pathways, to what Beth was saying, to make sure that you don't have a logjam where a student comes in. If your open roles don't have degree requirements, that make sure that then those promotion roles where they would be promoted also don't have degree requirements. Complicated process, but very doable, and our employers are doing it. Also, along with rethinking qualifications, it's not just taking the degrees out. There's a big emphasis on valuing experience and thinking about experience more broadly than we have in the past. It's not just a check the box internship. I met with a student yesterday, a recent CUNY grad. He has a 4-year degree, was a double major, worked at Starbucks 40 hours a week all for the last 3 years of his degree. Okay, what do I know about that student? He has a strong work ethic. He knows customer service, got yelled at by Starbucks for customers for 3 years, and he has time management skills. All things that are very applicable to a lot of entry-level jobs across our companies. So thinking about how we can help our employers value those stories, and also help students like this CUNY student tell those stories to make sure that that they value those skills as well, even though it doesn't look like a summer internship. That's a piece of rethinking qualifications. The second thing I would say is, just by removing the degree requirements, you don't suddenly just fill your seats with people that don't have degrees. So you have to, if you don't evolve your antiquated hiring practices, nothing is going to change. So tools that I've seen work, leveraging technology. A lot of our companies are using Skillfully, which was referenced earlier, which is essentially a digital ledger that helps validate skills. AI, just in general, there's a lot of other platforms out there, but and also different internally built tools can really help take the bias out and organize, assess, validate, again, all around the skills, and do that for the recruiters so that they don't have to be trying to do it through their own lens. The third thing I would say our companies are doing is experimenting with alternative talent pathways, or alternative pathways into their companies. a big example of this is apprenticeships. Looks different at some, at different companies. Accenture is a great example. They started their apprenticeship program in 2016. Since then, they've hired 1,200 apprentices into full-time roles, and they've pledged to have 20% of their open entry-level roles filled by apprentices going forward. So that alone, that success story, has inspired others of our members, and hopefully is inspiring other, middle and small-sized businesses to really be thinking of that as another way you can get that talent in the door, skilled, and in seats that will have a long-term trajectory within your company.
Thanks, Kirsten. Councilmember, I want to bring you in on this and think a little bit about what's the real-world impact of this in your district in Queens. I mean, you've championed a lot in the council already, focused on expanding economic opportunity, including helping a lot more New Yorkers earn degrees from CUNY. And a focus on youth development, on programs that are supporting job seekers through workforce development. How does this idea of a skills-first approach play into this? Are there folks in your district who would benefit from this shift, who maybe already are? How do you see advancing skills-based hiring and skills-first practices helping to create a more equitable economy for the residents of your district?
So listening to the last panel and even listening to you two, I always think about how the lack of coordination creates opportunities that are not really available for people locally in the community. So you kind of have to know about a program or know about an organization. And so one of the things that I think about is just the lack of coordination. So how do people funnel into these opportunities? How are jobs actually working hyper-local, micro-focus on specific communities that have needs? And I don't really see that level of coordination, and it's not one particular entity's fault. We have this huge workforce market, and oftentimes they're not coordinated to work with each other. So I had a conversation with CUNY about emerging markets, the cannabis industry. I've tried really hard to get a cannabis skills-based training, not college degree, at York College in my district. It did not happen last year, but to me, and another panelist said we missed the boat. I think another panelist talked about how with the tech industry, we weren't doing enough, and now the ship sailed. And I feel like we're sort of falling into the same traps of there are emerging industries in New York City, industries that have tremendous job growth, but the skills that New Yorkers have don't match the jobs, and or those jobs are setting the skills at these levels that don't really support people in community. And so how do we do both? How do we ensure that people have access to opportunities to gain skills, whether it's through an apprenticeship program, whether it's through some other type of training? But then how do jobs also work in tandem to ensure that they actually do have the opportunity, and eliminating barriers that might allow for someone or don't allow for someone to take on an opportunity? So I used to work for the JFK Redevelopment Program, and I'll just really speak briefly about that because I'm very passionate, and that is a very micro example of the lack of coordination between the Port Authority, between state government, between city government, it's a public-private partnership, so the multiple terminal developers that are also operating there, the contractors from the Tishmans to the other very large Skanska, large construction companies that do have capacity to create pipelines for opportunities, and that just doesn't exist. It's very disjointed, and there's no true central place for people to actually leverage opportunities. I'm a huge fan of Hire LAX. It's a program that they have in LA, and I've been trying very hard to get it in New York. And Hire LAX, to me, is a great example of what a coordinated effort looks like to get people onto a job and a career path.
Thanks, Councilmember. Well, I want to turn back to Beth about this and thinking a little bit about what other models out there are working, and I guess specifically thinking about what government can do, or what policy can do to help with these shifts, whether that's helping move the private sector along or supporting the workforce sector to become better able to assess and train for the skills that employers are looking for. What do you see as most helpful? Maybe it's a role for philanthropy as well, but what do you see as most helpful in shifting policy in that direction?
So I think there's sort of a multifaceted role for government to play here, and I do believe it has to operate in partnerships. One of the clear opportunities is the one that the council member just cited, which is there are a plethora of good efforts going on in every neighborhood, in every community, but how can the government in its role bring them together in a more coordinated way. So that's one thing. How does it bring the pieces together? We just released a report, for example, on the workforce opportunities from the Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And it lays out an agenda for what we really focused on states, but one of the core challenges in states in the infrastructure bill is that all the workforce money, virtually all of it, goes to the infrastructure agencies and not to the workforce agencies. So for that to actually get to people, to create access to what can be fantastic jobs, those groups have to work together in different ways. So that's one thing, helping to do that. Two, I think there's a fantastic role for the state and for governments to be leaders, both in their own practices. We heard that from the individual from the mayor's office who was talking. We've seen that in states. Colorado is another state where the governor has issued an executive order to shift to skills-based hiring, as has Pennsylvania. There's some stuff in Alaska and lots of other conversations. So how can the state be the role model and put this in practice? And I know from my experience in government, changing government hiring and promotion and HR practices is a challenge. It's hard in the private sector. It's harder in the public sector. There's lots to do there, but they can start making progress. And third, this role of being a bully pulpit and bringing together all the different folks in the community. I think we're at a point in time where there is this felt need on the part of employers. There's real momentum with the kind of organizations that are in place. And so how can you bring those things together? And the last piece is the policies that governments have around procurement, right? How can you encourage this, not just for the individuals you're hiring, but for the practices of the people with whom you're doing business? So a bunch of different things you can do there.
Thanks, Beth. Well, Kirsten, I want to bring you in on this as well, and thinking about, obviously, your member companies are doing a lot in this space already, but is there more of a role that local government could play in supporting these efforts? What would you like to see the mayor take on in the next year, for example?
Yeah, well, I would point to two things that we have seen that are successful but have barriers to scale. One is, I guess by this fall, we will have redesigned 20 AAS degrees across CUNY schools that have embedded apprenticeships to the second semester of their second year. And so what that looks like is you go to school 3 semesters. The last semester you go work at EY or JP Morgan for 40 hours a week. You take one class because they transfer credits from the classroom to the workplace. And then you graduate on time and it converts into a job. The conversion rate has been so high. It's been amazing. It's a great example of the try before you buy. It works for employers because if they're reticent to try, for a 2-year degree in departments where they are business lines where they've traditionally required 4, this is where we've seen our employers using this. And again, we've never seen them go back. So it's really paving the way for more businesses to follow. Just throwing that out there because what the council has done is fund the redesign of these. Now, that could also be funded by apprenticeship, money, whether it's work study or apprenticeship, but this is where I think that's one of the things, some of the definitions around what counts as apprenticeship, what counts as pre-apprenticeship, get so focused on technicalities and are a little bit antiquated, probably were around for different types of jobs, and lose sight of the whole point is, do you get a job? Like, are you getting a good job? Are you getting skills to get you a job? Another example of that is a partnership we have with the Department of Education, where we have, over the next 3 years, we'll have 3,000 public high school students across 58 schools doing apprenticeships for 16 hours a week, their junior and senior year. Why 16 hours a week? That's what they're allowed to do. Can they do that in 1.5 days or 2 days and then go to school 3 days? No. You could do that in Switzerland. You could do that in most other countries where your high schools do apprentices, but here they leave for 4 hours a day. So there are small barriers that while this program has been very successful, I already foresee the scalability will come down to hinge on some of these smaller technicalities. A student that's in the Bronx to get on the subway, come down to JP Morgan, go back up. It's just everyone can do the math in their head. I mean, this is not the most sustainable way to do something like this. Whereas the Cristo Rey model, the students leave for 1 day a week and they go work, and then they're in the classroom 4 days a week. That makes sense. How do they do it? Well, those are registered as work study, not apprenticeships. So there's a lot of this that I think local government, also federal government, but can play a role in, and I think local government can play a role simply in helping the CUNYs of the world or DOEs navigate some of these barriers that need to be overcome in order to let programs that have demonstrated success scale throughout our systems.
Thanks, Kirsten. And I want to ask a little bit, Councilmember, about government as an employer. Obviously, the council's made it really clear that solving the vacancy challenges in city government is a huge priority this year. Can reducing or even eliminating degree requirements from government jobs help? Is that part of the agenda? What would you like to see the city government do to become a more skills-first employer?
I lean into the fact that I've only been a council member for like a year and 2 months. Maybe at some point I can't use that excuse, but it's actually been very frustrating. And I came from government and also outside of government. I was a lobbyist for a little bit. I worked for like a state agency or by state agency. So it's not like I'm new to government, but being in the council and like understanding how difficult it is to address some of the nuances that you said is so frustrating, because I think I'm a pretty rational person. So it doesn't make sense what you just said, but like telling government that it doesn't make sense and then trying to fix it to make sense is very difficult, especially around, you said DOE, and I just laughed because like council members, and also understanding your power, right? Council members, we don't have that much power over DOE. We have mayoral control. The mayor can do whatever he wants, and then we're also preempted by the state. And so I would love to say, like, that's silly, let's fix it right away. But that just doesn't work. And there's so many things that are just really silly that just, you can't fix it right away. But to your question, and we actually just had a budget hearing. We're in budget hearings yesterday. It was general welfare, so HRA came, ACS came. So these are jobs that we need those jobs, but it is tremendous vacancy, and they can't seem to fill the jobs. And when you look at the criteria and you look at the pay, you have an issue. So you are requiring someone to have a 4-year degree, and they're only getting paid $50,000, which is not a lot in New York City. We know New York City is one of the most expensive cities to live in. And so, yes, I do think as a city we need to perhaps lower certain standards that are the baseline to getting those jobs. But we also need to figure out how we raise the wage, because I think that's also an issue that we have in the city, especially around jobs that we have in municipal government. Another thing is, I, again, laughed at the bureaucracy. I mean, a lot of these jobs, they can't do competitive hiring. So you have to take a test, and if you've taken a test for a city job, you can sit on a list for years. People, who understand government, they'll tell their child to take the test right after, high school and college, and then eventually, maybe in 10 years, someone will call you off a list. But that's not really sustainable, because so many things could change for people who are on those lists. And so you go through lists, you try to comb through the list, and you try to hire people, but it's very difficult. So not only should we look at the qualifications that are required for someone to get a job, we also need to look at these other pieces of city government that don't allow us to hire people expeditiously, or don't allow us to at least build a pipeline. And I know this is something that the mayor mentioned in his State of the City. I know they have a special initiative that they're trying to curate to sort of have this apprenticeship sort of pipeline for people to get into municipal jobs. We're not doing enough of it. I remember being a summer intern in college. I don't even think they have the summer internship program anymore in the city. There's not a lot of ways to get into city government outside of, again, taking a test and sitting on a waiting list, and or knowing someone, and or perhaps you did apply and you get a competitive job, but there's not that many competitive jobs that you can actually hire for.
Thanks, Councilmember. Well, I want to ask maybe both of you as well, Beth and Kirsten, about the government piece of this. And in particular, government as an employer, and Councilmember, I mean, in your own district, only about, I think, a quarter of working adults have a bachelor's degree. So those folks are already being barred from most jobs in New York City government just for that factor alone. But the private sector is moving faster. I mean, we know that since the pandemic hit, research showed that employers reduced degree requirements for about a quarter of their jobs. It was an even sharper decrease from 2017 to 2019 in that, particularly tight labor market. So, can government learn from the private sector on this? And maybe more to the point, are there specific examples, and Maryland is one that's been raised already today, where government has actually been intentional about removing degree requirements and benefited? What would you like to see there?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on a little bit of the historical piece. If you look at the degree inflation happened around 2008, 2009, and that's because the supply of labor was, far outweighed the demand for it. Right now, we're in a different place, even though I just had an alert that Meta's laying off another 10,000 people. Overall, we are still we have a bigger supply of jobs than we do, a bigger demand for jobs than we do supply. Anytime that happens, the readjustment will happen, and that's why we're starting to see it. And it's not shocking that we saw it from the private sector first. That happens also with other things. So recognizing that if you're going to get that talent, then you are incentivized to get more creative, and particularly with the degree requirements, because they were inflated at a time when basically people just slapped on degree requirements without changing the actual job, it really wasn't that hard to take them back off. There was a time in not that recent history when they didn't require them. I think that my sense is anything in government is harder to change. But I do think looking to the private sector, and also just the market will force it to happen at some point because of the need for talent. And I mean, the city is the largest employer in the city.
So I agree with all those things. And I think, when I think about government changing as an employer, it does follow the same principles of what the private sector needs, right? You need some practical tools to help make this happen, right? If you're going to rewrite a job description, that's a lot of work. One of the things we focused on at the Rework America Alliance is saying, what are some tools that can cover some of the things? So we actually have a tool that enables you to create skills-based job descriptions that start with the most important required skills. It distinguishes between technical skills and foundational skills, and ones that are required and ones that are preferred. And you only get to this question, I think Abby teed that up before, about requirements and education rights at the bottom of the form, right? So when you're reading it, that's what you're reading in mind. So there's ways to make that doing, because like writing a job description at 5 o'clock at night is really hard. It's hard for government, it's hard for the private sector. There's tools like that, there's training. It takes change management. It's not just from the top, but at all the layers of the organization. Grads of Life, who Beth was on the panel earlier, are great partners of ours. Their whole being is to help drive that change management process in companies and give them advice to what makes that happen. And I think you really need to make that change happen all the way through government. Whether it's through that, we've built a cadre of what we call activators who use a mix of some online training and others to really say, how are we going to drive that through and have that happen? And the last piece is, once you've done all those things, you actually need people who believe that they have the skills to get those jobs and a way to get connected to them. And I know the council member could tell you the best way to find those people in her district. I could tell you how to find them in Denver, but I don't know how to do it here. So it's building those connections locally. And I think government's got to go through the same process that the private sector does if you're going to make a difference at scale. You need tools, you need technical support, you need connections, and then I'd also argue you ought to start with the places where it's hardest and where where it's easiest, right? Where is there a need where the requirements really don't fit? We were able to make the progress that I described before with HICPUF in Colorado because they had a 35% vacancy rate, and so something needed to change. So how do you start with the place where there's a real need, where you know that there's a talent pool that could fulfill it differently, and you've got leaders who are ready to act? And I think if you do that, you create the momentum to have it act in other places.
And city government is not too far off of that vacancy rate right now, so potentially some of those conditions are there. So I know we only have a few minutes left. I do want to make sure we turn it over to our amazing audience for some questions, so we'll leave it there for a moment. Same as before, hands up, please state your name, organization, please keep your questions short. We'll get to as many as we can. We'll go to Ken right there in the middle, who was patiently waiting last time. Your microphone's going to come around to you, and I'll scan the room, make sure we get the questions in. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Eli, Jonathan. It's always delightful to be at a CUF event. My name is Ken Brown. I'm the district manager of Bronx Community Board 5. My opinions are my own. I'd like to adopt the contrarian in the room position. I think everyone should go to a four-year degree liberal arts college. And my concern with the panel and what informs the panel is, how is this not part of the dronification of our country? I think it's really important that people go to things like a liberal arts college to learn critical thinking skills, inculcation in the arts, humanities traditions, And I don't see how these kinds of mindsets and orientations are going to be captured in the kind of paradigm that's being promoted. If we bemoan the lack of critical thinking in our society, if we bemoan the dissolution of social cohesion, I see the arts and humanity as being at least a part of the remedy for that. And my concern is that if we remove the incentive in the workplace to get a 4-year liberal arts degree, that will not be recaptured, and our society will be gravely damaged for that.
Thanks, Ken.
I wanted to jump in because I have this conversation a lot because I don't know, I'm in a PhD program right now, and I do value education, but I don't think everybody is going to go into college or wants to go to college or needs to go to college, or college is going to perhaps somehow inform who they are as a person and their ability to think. I do think it's important, but I think we need to create pathways for everybody. So I always talk about our high school students. I feel like for a very long time, and this is probably indicative of why jobs have college degrees, because we've funneled everyone into this sort of academic institution space. Everyone's gonna go to college. You have to go to college, but what about the student that doesn't want to go or doesn't have the capacity to go, but they also need to be able to sustain themselves and their families? And so how are we creating space for that student as well? And I don't think as a society, especially here in New York City, maybe other societies, other places have done a better job, but I don't think we've done a good enough job of creating opportunities for a plethora of students who are coming out of high school. So I hear you, and I think that we definitely need to continue to support higher education and create access to higher education for all students. But at the same time, we should also provide resources for students who really just need to gain an amazing skill set to get a really good job to be able to sustain their future. So I think it's a yes and not an or, because I think for jobs that don't require degrees, again, I think of it as wages too. This is about economics. This is about the ability for people to have a comfortable life. And so regardless of degree, how are we assessing wages and how are we providing those opportunities? So I view this as a yes and. I don't think that we should minimize higher education, but I think we should also support other resources that allow people to get a career.
Thanks,
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, the current system isn't working for everyone. So I went to a liberal arts college too, loved it, but that is not working for everyone. If you look at the dropout rates at CUNY, even with 2 years, 4 years, it's just not a sustainable system. It's not getting us the workforce that we need. So I do think that pathways, to your point, it's all about the future of the workforce is about pathways, and there is no one size fits all. If you want to work in IT at Google, you can go get a 2-year degree, you can get a 4-year degree, you can go to Multiverse out of high school and do a 15-month apprenticeship, and 90% of them convert into a job. So it's more around what's the job they want and how do you get there. I do think you can teach critical things like critical thinking and other skills that are important in the workplace in other ways.
Yeah.
Beth, I thought that was a question tailor-made for you, but I think your fellow panelists nailed
My
it. so-
fellow panelists have done a great job. And the only thing I'd add is if I think about how dynamic the economy is today, how much work is changing. Think about, all of our collective experiences over the last 3 years with the pandemic, from moving from you only had meetings in person to you actually only have meetings on Zoom. To me, the model that I feel like we need, and that my fellow panelists said, is how do we think about lifelong learning? How do we think about building critical skills over the course of a lifetime? Part of when we talked about foundational skills, it is critical thinking, it's problem solving, it's understanding people. And so how do you build those skills through work, through training, through education in multiple ways, and not just when someone is 18 to 22 in one single place? I think that's what will actually help most with some of the societal issues you're changing. And it's a model that says those things will continue broadly in a variety of different forms over the course of your career. And we need that.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the responses. So I see a question in the back of the room right there, and microphone's coming your way. And then we'll take one question in the middle there.
Good morning, folks. I'm Christine I represent the South Bronx Overall Economic Development Corp., the nonprofit sector. Thank you. And I have a two-part question, and it's really more for Kirsten and Beth, but I would love to get Natasha's feedback on it as well. In terms of young people, we service a lot of young people in our South Bronx community, 18 to 24, who are not college-bound. What are your views on doing these apprenticeship programs, kind of upskilling them, and then as they enter the workforce, incentivizing them to go back to school, and then shaping kind of incentives or accommodations around that? Because a lot of the feedback we get is, I would really like to go to school, Ms. Christine, but now I'm working full-time and I don't want to have to make that sacrifice because I'm living and I'm getting a comfortable wage, back to Ms. Williams' point. And the second thing is, we also have a lot of folks kind of re-entering the workforce post-COVID, kind of shifting around. How do we, or can we, or what are the ideas around training them in diversity and inclusion techniques to kind of regenerate their workforce to feel comfortable to come back, and what are those views like?
So I'll start this time. I love the issue you raised, and I think it goes to the point I just made. In my mind, the most effective support for individuals is really to help them think about what's the mix of working life experience and education that can happen over the course of their career, recognizing that for most people, that means they need to be earning while they're learning. They can't afford not to be earning while they're learning. So how do we integrate that? That involves changes in a couple places, right? It involves changes in the way we deliver training and how we package it. It involves changes in the way employers think about investing in their workforce as part of the way they're going to grow their talent base. It involves changes in the way we provide guidance. Another piece of our work at the Rework America Alliance is really focused on the career counselors and the folks who work at your organization, right, at the front line, giving advice to individuals. How do we help them understand what this skills-based model really means? How do we help them understand what are the career progression opportunities available for individuals in a human-centered, equity-driven way? And we've got all sorts of training, digital and available for free, so happy to talk to you about that, that can help those career counselors be more effective in providing that guidance to workers. And I think this paradigm shift of more over the course of a lifetime, not necessarily all at once, that integrates working and learning and earning is the way that we will probably collectively get to where we need to be for workers and the companies who are looking to bring on that talent.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think large employers and then also particular industries such as healthcare are becoming learning institutions in itself. And we haven't been talking about the other piece of skills-based hiring is also skills-based promoting, and it's reskilling your current workforce, and it's taking your Amazon warehouse workers and then moving them into the corporate because they go back to CUNY and get their degree while they're working. And so again, I think there's no one size fits all. We see I think if the choice is down to taking an apprenticeship opportunity and the fear is, will I end up without a degree? I do think that, particularly again, if you're looking at healthcare, if you're looking at large employers, there's tuition reimbursement. You may not do it as fast, but there are opportunities to do that. You're not locking yourself in for life. So I think that I'm a big fan of the earn and learn model, however you can take it. And I think particularly as you look at big employers in healthcare, and I imagine others will follow, they're thinking about how you accept people that you will be responsible for training and developing and continuing to educate throughout their career at your company.
Thank you both.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions today, but could you join me in giving a great hand for this panel? Thank you so much. I wish we could keep going. That was wonderful. Thanks also to all the panelists and speakers from our first panel. Thanks to all of you for coming out in some pretty crappy weather. I appreciate that. I also want to give a big shout out to my staff, especially Stephanie, for putting together today's event. And also to Indeed for their partnership, for their support, for making this happen. And lastly, if you just bear with me for 1 second, a call to action. We really want this event to not be the end of this discussion, but really the beginning. And I think New York has a long way to go. This is really one of the first conversations. Things have been happening, as we've heard, but there's still a lot more to be done around skills-based hiring. And we're really hoping that this event serves as kind of a catalyst. And in fact, my colleagues and I at the Center for an Urban Future will be partnering with Indeed And Jonathan Gonzalez here has been a real partner with us. We're going to be convening a series of roundtables, private roundtables, where we're going to bring together some employers, some workforce practitioners, and also ideally some folks in government to really kind of roll up our sleeves and try to figure out how do we make progress on skills-based hiring in New York. And so I wanted to mention that, but also say if any of you in the room today are interested in that, please see me, please see Jonathan from Indeed, or let us know via email. We'd love to include you, and we really want to move this forward. So again, thanks to everybody for speaking today, and thanks for all that you do for our city. Take care.